If you know one thing about Mary Shelley, it's probably that she wrote Frankenstein, a simple horror tale, the Buffy the Vampire Slayer of her day. But if you look at the life of Mary Shelley, it becomes clear that Frankenstein was a tale that dealt with science, revolution, religion, philosophy and sexuality. Not all of which comes across in Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. It's as if there was an offshoot of Schindler's List called Schindler, I Shrunk the Kids. Mary Shelley not only wrote a fantastic story, she brought together all the themes of her age. And in doing so, she invented science fiction. Most amazing of all, she wrote Frankenstein when she was 18. Whereas most 18-year-olds are happy if their creative writing amounts to texting Aaron is minging to the Big Brother house. Mary Shelley had two things in her favour, the times in which she lived and the circle she was born into. In particular, she was influenced by the mother that she never knew, the writer Mary Wollstonecroft, who wrote the first ever book in English advocating women's rights. A vindication of the rights of women. This book was in part a reply to the Genevan philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who inspired many of the radicals that led the French Revolution. But his ideas about women were complicated. For example, at the height of his philosophical powers, he married a huge illiterate maid who didn't know the months of the year, which must have made for fantastic conversations. How can we be certain that what we perceive is actually real? Oh, I don't know. Now I've got one for you. Have we had Christmas yet? Rousseau wrote that women were naturally coy and passive, and men and women shouldn't be educated in the same way, he said, because
each sex has its peculiar taste. Boys love noise of sport and activity, to beat the drum and to drag about their cars. Girls, on the other hand, are fond of trinkets, mirrors and dolls.
So Mary Wollstonecraft wrote that if women appeared to be more passive than men, this was because of their status. She said that women were treated like soldiers in an army, brought up to obey and not to question. You've got to do it well. And she took on Rousseau's argument about girls playing with dolls.
The doll will never excite attention unless confinement allows a girl no alternative.
Let's go on a diet!
And it must make a difference that before a girl is 1 year old, people are buying her dolls and pink skirts covered in flowers and a pop-up bikini-lined waxing book. And if it's a boy, they get him My First Ethnic Cleanser. And if someone sees a 2-year-old girl pushing a pram in a park, they go, oh, look, she's such a girl. It's the wheels that interest her. She's not pushing it thinking, oh, well, I better get in practice because I live in the borough of Romford, so it won't be long now. And Mary Wollstonecraft spoke of female sexuality. One night she wrote to her future husband,
I've seldom seen so much live fire running about my features as this morning, when recollections very dear called forth the flush of pleasure as I adjusted my hair.
This, remember, was at a time when women were seen as little more than children, unfit for proper work and with smaller brains. They weren't supposed to be sexually charged to the point of blushing with live fire as they adjusted their hair. This was a woman whose whole political outlook led her to fight for the right to be driven by passion. Whereas you imagine for a modern politician, the first his wife knows about it when he's reached the peak of passion is when he says, I'll respond to that in a full statement later this afternoon. Mary Wollstonecraft came to Paris to take part in the revolution, and while she was here, she had a baby. After she'd fallen out with the father of the baby, she then met and fell in love with William Godwin. She became pregnant by Godwin, and in 1797, she had another baby who she also called Mary. A few days later, the mother became infected, and when baby Mary was 10 days old, her mother died, having created a life that destroyed her own. So young Mary Shelley was brought up by her father, which meant a childhood surrounded by books. Godwin was determined that his daughters would follow in the tradition of Mary Wollstonecraft and be capable of presenting an argument.
Right, so this week's lecture is about Benjamin Franklin.
So he built a pulpit in his living room from which he encouraged them to deliver lectures on any subject. And there was something else that as a child would affect her forever. It was normal for the bodies of murderers who'd been hanged at Newgate to be handed to scientists for experiments. And one of her father's friends was a prominent scientist called Anthony Carlyle.
I'm 2, 3, 4.
He saw one of these experiments in which a vast machine comprising 240 metal plates was wired to a corpse's head. Carlyle enthusiastically told Godwin and his daughters how
The jaw of the deceased criminal began to quiver, and one eye actually opened. In the next experiment, the right hand was raised and clenched, and the legs and thighs were set in motion. It appeared to all bystanders that the wretched man was on the point of being restored to life.
electricity had become a central issue in the battle of ideas in the previous century. For radicals, it represented immense human possibilities, the triumph of science and reason over mystical beliefs about angels and demons. And I suppose it's a sign of the difference between their times and ours, that they thought, wow, with electricity we can strap a corpse to a chair and bring it back to life. Whereas now we can have a leader of the free world who thinks, wow, with electricity I could strap a live person to a chair and make his head melt. One example of this debate about electricity came in France in the years before the Revolution. For centuries, most people have believed that lightning was just a thunderbolt from God. Then an American revolutionary, Benjamin Franklin, wrote that lightning was electric fire and could be conducted, which he demonstrated with an electric kite. And leaders of the French Revolution had furious arguments about his theories. So when Mary Shelley heard the scientist Carlyle enthuse about this electrified corpse, she was hearing the next stage of this debate between radicals. When Mary was 14, her unusual education continued when she was sent to an anti-establishment school in Dundee. And while she was there, her father received letters from a poet, Percy Shelley. Percy had been expelled from Oxford for writing a pamphlet, The Necessity of Atheism. He wanted to use the inheritance from his father and grandfather to pay Godwin to write more political books. The problem was he hadn't received the inheritance because his father and grandfather were still alive. Shelley arranged a loan from a bank on the agreement that he'd repay it 4